What's the moment that made you decide keeping the peace wasn't worth losing yourself? When I found the second phone in my wife's gym bag, I didn't scream. I didn't throw it. I just stood there in our bedroom, holding this cheap burner phone with its cracked screen, watching my hands shake so badly I almost dropped it. The thing that broke me wasn't the phone itself. It was the text preview on the locked screen. Can't wait until he's gone. Then we can finally be together. The contact name was just a heart emoji, nothing else. I'd been married to Rebecca for 11 years, and I was holding proof that those years meant absolutely nothing. But here's the thing nobody tells you about betrayal. It doesn't hit you all at once like in the movies. It seeps in slowly, like water through a cracked foundation, until one day you realize your entire house has been rotting from the inside. I should have known something was wrong months earlier, maybe even years, but I was too busy being the good guy, the peacekeeper, the one who always gave everyone the benefit of the doubt. My brother David used to joke that I'd apologize to a burglar for not having better stuff to steal. He thought it was funny. Turns out he was counting on it. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up to where this really started, because the phone was just the moment everything crystallized. The real story began about 8 months earlier, on a Wednesday in March, when my brother asked to borrow $15,000. David had always been the charismatic one in our family, the guy who could talk his way into or out of anything. He'd been between opportunities for about 6 months, which was his way of saying he'd quit another job because his boss didn't appreciate his vision. Our parents had bailed him out twice already that year, but they'd finally cut him off after he blew through their money on some cryptocurrency scheme that went nowhere. So he came to me, his younger brother, the reliable one, the software engineer with the steady paycheck and the nice house in the suburbs. "It's just temporary," he'd said, sitting in my living room with that sheepish grin he'd perfected over 3 decades. "I've got a consulting contract starting next month. Really solid opportunity. I just need to bridge the gap." Rebecca had been there too, perched on the arm of the couch, and I remembered the way she'd looked at him. At the time, I'd interpreted it as sisterly affection. She'd always gotten along great with David. They'd even become workout buddies over the past year, hitting the gym together 3 times a week while I was stuck at the office debugging code for a product launch. I'd thought it was sweet that they were bonding. I'd told myself it was healthy that my wife had her own friendships, even with my brother. I was such an idiot. 15,000 is a lot, I'd said, because even Mr. Nice Guy has limits. "What's it for specifically?" David had launched into this elaborate explanation about security deposits for office space, incorporation fees, business insurance. He had documents pulled up on his phone, estimates from vendors, a whole professional presentation. Rebecca had chimed in too, talking about how family helps family, how David had been there for us when we needed him. I couldn't actually remember a specific time when David had been there for us, but I didn't want to be the bad guy. I didn't want to be the brother who turned his back on family, so I'd written the check. That was the first crack in the foundation. I just didn't see it yet, because I was too busy telling myself I was doing the right thing. My wife supported it, my brother needed it, and I could technically afford it even if it meant putting off the kitchen renovation Rebecca had been planning. She'd been disappointed about that, I remembered, but she'd said she understood. "Family comes first," she'd told me, squeezing my hand. I'd felt like a good husband, a good brother, a good man. The truth was making me sick to my stomach as I stood there 8 months later, still holding that burner phone. The second crack appeared in May. I came home from work early one Friday, rare for me during a product cycle, and found David's car in our driveway. Not weird by itself. He'd been coming over more frequently since I'd loaned him the money. What was weird was that all the curtains were drawn at 3 in the afternoon, and when I walked in through the garage, the house had this strange, charged atmosphere, like I'd interrupted something. Rebecca was in the kitchen wearing her yoga pants and a sports bra, face flushed, hair wet. "Oh, you're home early," she'd said, and there was something in her voice I couldn't quite identify. Surprise, annoyance, guilt. "David and I just finished a brutal workout," she'd explained before I could ask. "He's in the bathroom." Sure enough, my brother emerged a few minutes later, also in workout clothes, also looking like he'd just exercised hard. They'd been doing high-intensity interval training in our basement, Rebecca said, using the home gym I'd installed for her last Christmas. I'd smiled and nodded and asked if they wanted to stay for dinner. David had declined quickly, too quickly, saying he had plans. After he left, I'd noticed Rebecca seemed distracted, distant. When I'd tried to initiate sex that night, she'd claimed she was too sore from the workout. I'd kissed her forehead and told her to get some rest. Good husband, patient husband, clueless husband. Through June and July, the pattern continued and intensified. David was at our house constantly, always with a plausible excuse, needed to use my printer, wanted to borrow a tool, hoping to get my advice on a business decision. Rebecca was always happy to see him, always offering him coffee or lunch, always suggesting they do another workout together since they were both there anyway. I was working 70-hour weeks trying to hit our Q3 deadline, coming home exhausted to find my wife and brother laughing together in the living room, sometimes with a bottle of wine open. "You work too hard," Rebecca would say, but there was no real concern in her voice anymore. Just observation, like she was making a note about a stranger. The money became an issue again in late July. David needed another $10,000. The consulting contract had fallen through, But he had an even better opportunity lined up. All he needed was capital for equipment and licensing fees. When I'd hesitated, Rebecca had actually gotten angry with me. "He's your brother," she'd said, like that explained everything. "He's trying to build something. Why are you being so difficult?" We'd had our first real fight in years that night. I'd accused her of caring more about David's feelings than our financial security. She'd accused me of being selfish and unsupportive. We'd slept in separate rooms. The next morning, I'd apologized and written the check because I couldn't stand the tension. Peace at any price. That was my philosophy. August brought more warning signs that I rationalized away with Olympic-level mental gymnastics. Rebecca started spending more on her appearance, new clothes, expensive haircuts, professional manicures every week. "I want to feel good about myself," she'd said when I gently mentioned the credit card bill. Is that a crime? It wasn't, of course. I wanted her to feel good about herself. I just didn't understand why feeling good about herself required $800 at Nordstrom when she used to shop at Target. She was also on her phone constantly, texting and smiling at the screen in a way she never smiled at me anymore. "Just group chat with the girls," she'd say if I asked. I never asked to see the messages because that would mean I didn't trust her, and good husbands trust their wives. Labor Day weekend was when things got really strange. Rebecca announced she was going on a spa retreat with some friends, 3 days at a resort 2 hours north. "I need this," she'd said. "I've been so stressed." I'd been hurt that she hadn't invited me, that we couldn't make it a couple's thing, but I'd hidden it. "You deserve it, babe. Have fun." She'd kissed me on the cheek, not the lips, and driven off Friday morning. David had coincidentally mentioned he was going camping that same weekend, some guy's trip he'd been planning. I'd been invited to neither excursion. I'd spent the weekend working and catching up on sleep and feeling vaguely lonely in a way I couldn't quite articulate. When Rebecca came back Sunday night, she'd seemed different. Lighter somehow, but also distant, like part of her was still somewhere else. She'd been cagey about details of the spa retreat. "It was fine," she'd said. "Relaxing. You know how it is." I didn't actually, because I hadn't been on a vacation in 3 years, but I didn't say that. We'd had sex that night for the first time in weeks, but it felt mechanical, obligatory. Afterward, she'd scrolled through her phone while I'd tried to cuddle. "I'm just tired," she'd said when I'd pulled away, hurt. "Don't be so sensitive." The financial situation came to a head in mid-September when I'd finally looked at our bank statements and credit card bills properly. We were $32,000 in debt that hadn't existed a year ago. $25,000 of that was the loans to David, which he'd made zero effort to repay despite the solid opportunities he'd been pursuing. The rest was Rebecca's spending. When I'd tried to have a calm, rational discussion about our finances, she'd exploded. "Maybe if you paid more attention to me instead of your job, I wouldn't need to find ways to make myself happy," she'd screamed. "Maybe if you were more like—" She'd stopped herself, but the implication hung in the air. More like who? More like David? I'd started having anxiety attacks at work. My boss, Thomas Weaver, actually pulled me aside after I'd blanked during a presentation. "Everything okay at home?" he'd asked. Thomas was one of those rare managers who actually gave a damn about his team. I'd lied and said everything was fine, just stressed about the deadline. He'd looked skeptical but hadn't pushed. I'd gone home that night determined to fix things with Rebecca. I'd picked up flowers, made reservations at her favorite restaurant, planned to really talk about what was happening to us. She'd canceled 30 minutes before the reservation, texting that she'd forgotten she'd made plans with David to go over some business idea he wanted her opinion on. "He really values my input," she'd written. Rain check? There'd been no rain check. There was never going to be a rain check. But I'd kept trying because that's what good husbands do. They try. They compromise. They keep the peace. Even when keeping the peace meant slowly suffocating yourself. The burner phone changed everything. It was a Thursday in late September, about 6 months ago from where I'm sitting now. Rebecca had asked me to grab her gym bag from the garage because she needed her water bottle. Such a small, normal request. I'd found the bag, unzipped it to grab the water bottle, and there it was underneath her towel and yoga mat. A phone I'd never seen before. My first thought was that someone must have accidentally left it there, maybe another gym member. Then I'd seen the text preview on the locked screen. "Can't wait until he's gone. Then we can finally be together." My brain tried to create innocent explanations. Maybe it wasn't about me. Maybe he was someone else entirely. Maybe this phone belonged to a friend with relationship drama, and Rebecca was holding onto it for some reason. But my hands knew the truth before my mind accepted it. They were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I'd stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, just staring at those words, feeling my entire reality shift beneath my feet. I didn't confront her right away. That's not how I work. I needed to know the full truth first. I needed evidence that couldn't be explained away or turned back on me somehow. So I took photos of the phone with my own phone, then carefully placed it exactly where I'd found it, got the water bottle, and brought everything to Rebecca. "Thanks, babe," she'd said, not even looking up from her laptop. "You're the best." I'd smiled. I'd said, "No problem." I'd gone upstairs to our bedroom and quietly had a panic attack in the master bathroom with the shower running so she wouldn't hear me hyperventilating. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to my wife, listening to her breathe, wondering who she was texting when I wasn't looking, wondering how long this had been going on, wondering if David was the heart emoji contact or if there was someone else entirely. The thought of multiple betrayals made my stomach lurch. I'd gotten up at 2 in the morning and done something I'd never done before. I'd started looking through Rebecca's things. Not obviously, not destructively, but methodically. I'd checked coat pockets, the glove compartment in her car, the storage boxes in the basement. I'd felt like a criminal, like a paranoid husband from a bad TV movie. But I'd also felt like I was finally starting to wake up from a very long sleep. I didn't find much that first night, but I found enough. Receipts from restaurants I'd never been to on days when Rebecca said she was working late or at the gym. A Visa bill for a credit card I didn't know she had, showing charges at hotels in nearby cities. A birthday card tucked into a book on her nightstand, not for her birthday, which was in March, but for someone else's. To my favorite workout partner, it read inside. Thanks for making everything more fun. XOXO. No signature. I'd taken photos of everything with my phone, hands shaking the whole time. Friday, I'd called in sick to work. First sick day I'd taken in 2 years. I'd told Rebecca I thought I had food poisoning, that she should go to the gym without me. I'd be fine. She'd seemed almost relieved to have an excuse to leave. After she drove off, I'd gone through the house more thoroughly. I'd found her laptop. She'd forgotten to lock it when she'd rushed out. Her email was still open. I'd told myself I was doing something terrible, that this was a violation of privacy, that good husbands don't spy. Then I'd started reading. The emails went back almost a year. Most were mundane. Work stuff, correspondence with friends, online shopping confirmations. But there was a separate folder, barely noticeable, labeled Fitness Goals. Inside were emails between Rebecca and my brother David. Hundreds of them. They started innocent enough. Workout tips, diet suggestions, motivational quotes. Then they shifted. Compliments that went too far. Inside jokes that excluded me. Planning meetups that I was never told about. By May, the emails had become explicitly romantic. I think about you constantly, David had written. Being around him while wanting you is torture. Rebecca's response? I know, but we have to be patient. Once we figure out the money situation, we can make our move. The money situation. $25,000 I'd loaned my brother. Money that was supposed to be for his business, but was probably funding hotels and dinners and God knows what else. I'd sat at Rebecca's desk reading email after email, feeling like I was watching a car crash in slow motion. They'd discussed how to get more money out of me. Rebecca had suggested she could work on him about the kitchen renovation fund. That's another 30 grand easy. David had replied, You're brilliant. He trusts you completely. Always has. They'd even joked about how clueless I was. He actually thanked me for spending time with you, David had written. Said he was glad we were getting along so well. Rebecca's response was a laughing emoji. I'd found the photos next, in a hidden folder on her laptop, password protected. But the password was our wedding anniversary because Rebecca wasn't as clever as she thought she was. Pictures of David and Rebecca together at places I'd never been. Selfies in hotel rooms. Intimate photos I couldn't look at without wanting to vomit. The dates on the files went back to April, 2 months after I'd loaned David the first $15,000. They'd been planning this for months, using me, laughing at me, building their future on my money and my trust and my pathological need to keep everyone happy. There were also text message screenshots in the folder, presumably from the burner phone. Discussions about the plan. They wanted to wait until they'd gotten as much money from me as possible, then Rebecca would file for divorce. In the meantime, they needed to keep him working and not suspicious. There was even a message from last week. He tried to talk about our finances again. I shut it down. He's so pathetic when he tries to be assertive. Don't worry, I can handle him. David's response, That's my girl. I'd closed the laptop very carefully. I'd walked downstairs. I'd gotten a glass of water. I'd drunk it. Then I'd thrown the glass against the kitchen wall as hard as I could, watching it explode into hundreds of pieces. I'd stood there in my socks, surrounded by broken glass, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. Keeping the peace wasn't worth this. It had never been worth this. I'd sacrificed my dignity, my financial security, and my mental health trying to be the good guy, and all it had gotten me was betrayed by the two people who should have been most loyal to me. But here's what Rebecca and David didn't know about me. What nobody knew because I'd spent my whole life being the nice guy. I was very, very good at my job. And my job was solving complex problems using logic, data, and systematic analysis. They thought they were playing me. They had no idea I was about to flip the board. First, I documented everything. I spent that entire Friday taking photos and screenshots of every piece of evidence I could find. The emails, the photos, the text messages, the receipts, the credit card statements. I created a digital folder and backed it up in 3 separate locations: cloud storage, external hard drive, and a USB drive I gave to my friend Michael from work with instructions to open it if anything happened to me. Paranoid? Maybe. But I was done taking chances. Second, I consulted a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I found Alexandra Torres, a divorce attorney with a reputation for being absolutely ruthless. Her consultation fee was $500 for 2 hours. Best money I ever spent. I'd walked into her office Monday morning. I'd taken another sick day, told Rebecca I was still feeling terrible, carrying a laptop full of evidence. Alexandra was in her late 50s, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Show me what you have," she'd said. I'd shown her. Everything. She'd gone very still as she reviewed the evidence, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. After about 40 minutes, she'd looked up at me and said, "Mr. Collins, your wife and your brother are committing fraud. Not just adultery, actual financial fraud. These emails discuss deliberately deceiving you to obtain money under false pretenses. That's a crime." I'd felt something light up in my chest. Hope, maybe, or vindication. "What are my options?" I'd asked. Alexandra had laid them out methodically. Option 1, file for divorce immediately, use the evidence to ensure I got a favorable settlement, possibly pursue criminal charges against David for fraud. Option 2, continue documenting for a few more weeks to strengthen the case even further, then proceed with divorce and criminal charges. Option 3, confront them now with everything I knew and see if they'd leave quietly without forcing a legal battle. "What would you do?" I'd asked. She'd smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. "I'd burn them to the ground, but I'm vindictive. You need to decide what you can live with." I'd chosen option 2, but with modifications. I wanted to watch them implode. I wanted them to know that I knew. And I wanted to make sure everyone else knew too. Our families, our friends, everyone who thought Rebecca was such a devoted wife, and David was such a great guy going through a rough patch. Alexandra had advised against letting emotions drive my decisions, but she'd also given me the name of a private investigator. "If you're going to do this, do it right," she'd said. "Get professional documentation. Make it airtight." The private investigator's name was Leonard Shaw. He was a former police detective who'd gone private after retirement, and he looked exactly like you'd expect. Rumpled suit, tired eyes, air of having seen everything twice. I'd met him in his office Wednesday evening after telling Rebecca I had a late meeting at work. "I need surveillance," I'd told him. "My wife and my brother. I need proof of adultery, and I need it documented in a way that will hold up in court." Leonard had quoted me $3,000 for 2 weeks of surveillance. I'd paid him on the spot using the credit card Rebecca didn't know about, the one I'd opened that week specifically for divorce-related expenses. Leonard was worth every penny. Within 3 days, he'd confirmed what I already knew. He had photos of Rebecca and David entering a hotel together Wednesday afternoon when Rebecca was supposedly at a doctor's appointment. Photos of them having dinner at a restaurant an hour away where they thought no one would recognize them. Photos of them in David's car in the parking lot of a park, clearly engaged in activities that weren't fraternal. The timestamps, the locations, the GPS data, all meticulously documented. "Your wife is not subtle," Leonard had said when he'd delivered the first report. "Neither is your brother. This is some of the easiest surveillance I've done in years." While Leonard gathered evidence, I played my part perfectly. I was the same dutiful husband I'd always been, patient, understanding, willing to work late when Rebecca suggested I focus on my career. Happy to lend David another $5,000 when he came calling in early October, money I handed over with a smile, knowing Alexandra was documenting it as additional evidence of fraud. Rebecca and David thought they were so smart, so careful. They had no idea I was watching their every move. If you are enjoying this story already, please subscribe to see more stories like this. The hardest part was pretending I didn't know. Coming home to Rebecca and acting normal when I knew she'd spent the afternoon in bed with my brother. Sitting across from David at Sunday family dinners at our parents' house, watching him laugh and joke while our mother fussed over him, knowing what he really was. I felt like I was living in a glass cage, observing my own life from the outside. But I stayed calm. I documented. I waited. The evidence kept piling up. Leonard followed them to another hotel in early October. Same hotel, same room number. "They're creatures of habit," he'd noted. "Lazy, overconfident." He'd gotten video this time, too, not of anything explicit, but of them entering the room together, staying for 3 hours, emerging looking disheveled and happy. The video had timestamps and GPS coordinates. Irrefutable. Then, in mid-October, I'd found something that changed the game entirely. I was reviewing our joint bank account statements, something I'd started doing obsessively, when I'd noticed a pattern of transfers from our savings to Rebecca's personal checking account. Small amounts, usually $300 to $800, often several times a week. When I'd added it up, she'd moved over $18,000 from our joint savings to her personal account in the past 4 months. Money that was supposed to be for our future, for emergencies, for the children we'd talked about having someday. She was systematically draining our assets, building her own private nest egg for when she left me. I'd taken this information to Alexandra immediately. "This strengthens your case considerably," she'd said. "Financial infidelity compounds the adultery. And combined with the fraud charges against your brother, you have substantial leverage." We'd started drafting the divorce papers that week. I was meticulous about everything I wanted included. Full accounting of all loaned money to David, documentation of Rebecca's transfers, division of assets that reflected her betrayal. Michigan was a no-fault divorce state, but the evidence of adultery and financial misconduct would influence the settlement. I'd also made another decision. I was going to tell my parents. Not yet, but soon. They needed to know what their golden child David had done. They needed to understand that their favoritism had enabled a monster. My mother would be devastated. My father would be furious. But they deserved to know the truth. By late October, I had everything I needed. Months of documented adultery, financial records showing fraud and theft, emails and texts proving premeditation and conspiracy, sworn affidavits from Leonard, a divorce settlement drafted and ready to file. I had the nuclear option, and I was ready to use it. But I wanted one more thing. I wanted a confession. I wanted to hear them admit it, preferably while being recorded. So I'd asked Leonard about surveillance equipment. You want to record them in your own home? He'd asked. It's legal in Michigan as long as one party to the conversation consents, and if you're in your own home, that's you. He'd set me up with 3 hidden cameras, one in the living room, one in the kitchen, one in the master bedroom. Voice activated, cloud backup, professional grade, $4,800 total, worth every cent. I'd installed them on a Monday while Rebecca was at lunch with friends, which Leonard confirmed was actually lunch with David at a restaurant 20 miles away. The cameras were completely invisible, hidden in everyday objects. A clock, a picture frame, a smoke detector. They'd never know they were being recorded. Then I waited. I knew they'd eventually slip up in my presence. They were getting careless, confident. It was only a matter of time. The moment came on a Thursday in early November. I'd come home early from work, deliberately, because Leonard had texted me that David was at my house and Rebecca had taken a sick day. I'd walked in through the front door instead of the garage. I'd heard them before I'd seen them, laughing, in my living room, on my furniture. I'd stood in the entryway for a moment, letting the cameras capture everything. Then I'd walked into the living room. They'd jumped apart like teenagers caught by parents. Rebecca's shirt was misbuttoned. David's hair was a mess. They both started talking at once, overlapping excuses and explanations. This isn't what it looks like, Rebecca had said, which was almost funny because it was exactly what it looked like. We were just talking, David had added. Rebecca was upset about something and called me over. I'd held up my hand. Stop. My voice had been calm, eerily calm. I know everything. I've known for weeks. I have emails. I have photos. I have video. I have financial records. I have evidence of fraud, adultery, and financial theft. I have statements from a private investigator who has been following you for the past month. I have recordings of conversations where you discussed how to manipulate me. I have everything. The silence that had followed was profound. I'd watched the blood drain from Rebecca's face. I'd watched David's expression cycle through denial, anger, and something like fear. What are you talking about? Rebecca had tried. You're being paranoid. Don't. I'd cut her off. I'm recording this conversation right now. Everything you say will be documented and provided to my attorney. You have 2 choices. You can leave this house immediately, or you can stay, and I'll call the police and have you forcibly removed. Either way, divorce papers will be filed tomorrow morning. David, you should also know that I've provided evidence of fraud to the district attorney's office. That's $15,000 obtained under false pretenses through documented deception. That's a felony. David had found his voice first. You can't prove anything. But his voice had shaken. I borrowed money from you. That's not fraud. I'd pulled out my phone and read directly from an email he'd sent Rebecca. Quote, the business idea is obviously bullshit, but he's dumb enough to buy it. Keep working on him for more. We'll need at least 40 grand total to make this work. End quote. Sent from your email address to Rebecca's, dated July 20th. Would you like me to continue? Rebecca had started crying, big, dramatic sobs that once would have broken my heart. Now they just annoyed me. How could you? She'd gasped. How could you spy on me? Invade my privacy? How could I? I'd laughed, and it had sounded harsh even to my own ears. You're really asking me that? After everything you've done? I'd looked at David. Get out of my house. If you're here in 5 minutes, I'm calling the police. David had left, actually run out the door without another word. Rebecca had tried a different tactic, bargaining, pleading. We can work this out, marriage counseling. I made a mistake. Please, don't throw away 11 years. But her eyes had been calculating. She was already thinking about damage control, about what she could salvage. Pack a bag, I'd said. You can stay somewhere else tonight. Tomorrow you can come get the rest of your things with a police escort if necessary. Our joint accounts are frozen as of an hour ago. I called the bank from work. Your personal account with my money in it has been flagged. Alexandra Torres is my attorney. You should get one too. She'd tried anger next. You bastard. You think you're so smart. You think you're so much better than everyone. This is why I did it. You're cold. You're controlling. You're out. I'd pointed to the door. Now. She'd grabbed her purse and stormed out, pausing at the door to deliver one final blow. David was right about you. You're pathetic. You were always pathetic. Then she'd slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I'd stood in my living room for a long time after she left, just breathing. My home felt different now, emptier, but also cleaner somehow, like an infection had been lanced. The cameras had captured everything, every word, every expression, every moment of their guilt and my resolve. The next few weeks had been a blur of legal proceedings. I'd filed for divorce Friday morning. The paperwork included extensive documentation of adultery, financial misconduct, and fraud. Rebecca's attorney, some guy named Richard Simmons, who seemed perpetually exhausted, had tried to negotiate, but Alexandra had shut him down hard. Your client committed adultery with the plaintiff's brother, systematically drained joint accounts, and participated in obtaining money through fraudulent pretenses, she'd said in our first mediation session. She has no leverage here, none. The criminal case against David had moved forward too. The district attorney, a woman named Patricia Keene with 20 years of experience prosecuting fraud cases, had reviewed my evidence and agreed there was sufficient cause to file charges. Financial fraud cases are hard to prove, she'd explained when I'd met with her. Usually it's he said, she said. But you have documentation of intent, emails where he explicitly discusses deceiving you. That's rare, that's valuable. David had been arrested in late November, charged with wire fraud and obtaining money under false pretenses. Bail had been set at $50,000, money he obviously didn't have. Our parents had paid it, still refusing to believe their son could do something like this. Thanksgiving had been a nightmare. Our parents had insisted on a family dinner despite everything. I'd gone, mostly because I wanted to see if they'd finally acknowledge what David had done. They hadn't. My mother had spent the entire meal crying about how her family was falling apart. My father had gotten drunk and told me I was destroying the family over a little money. When I'd pulled out my phone to show them the emails between David and Rebecca, my mother had literally covered her ears. I don't want to see it, she'd said. He made a mistake. We all make mistakes. He committed fraud, I'd said, my voice flat. He stole from me. He slept with my wife. These aren't mistakes. These are crimes. My father had told me to leave if I couldn't be civil, so I'd left. I hadn't spoken to either of them since. Some bridges need to burn. The divorce had been finalized in January, remarkably quickly because Rebecca had ultimately decided not to fight. Her attorney had advised her that with the evidence I had, she'd lose badly if we went to trial. She'd agreed to leave with essentially nothing, no alimony, minimal property division, and an agreement not to pursue any claims on my retirement accounts or equity in the house. In exchange, I'd agreed not to pursue civil damages for the money she'd stolen from our joint account. Alexandra had advised against being generous, but I just wanted her gone. The money wasn't worth dragging this out. David's criminal case had taken longer. He'd initially pled not guilty, clearly expecting me to back down or our parents to convince me to drop charges. I hadn't. The trial was scheduled for March. Patricia had been confident we'd get a conviction. The evidence was overwhelming. In late February, David's public defender had reached out about a plea deal. He'll plead guilty to fraud in exchange for probation and restitution, the defender had explained. 3 years supervised probation, full repayment of the $25,000 plus interest, and completion of a financial crimes education program. I'd accepted the deal, not because I was being nice, but because it guaranteed restitution and punishment without the uncertainty of a trial. David had appeared before a judge in early March, pled guilty, and been sentenced accordingly. I'd been there in the courtroom watching him admit what he'd done. Our mother had sobbed in the back row. Our father had glared at me like this was somehow my fault. David hadn't looked at me at all. The restitution came in court-ordered monthly payments, $750 a month for the next 3 years. I'd probably never see all of it, but the point wasn't really the money anymore. The point was that there were consequences. The point was that David's criminal record would follow him forever. Every job application, every apartment rental, every background check would show that he'd committed fraud against his own brother. Rebecca had tried to reach out a few times in the months after the divorce. Apologetic emails, text messages claiming she'd made a terrible mistake and wanted to explain. I'd blocked her number and set her emails to auto-delete. There was nothing she could say that I wanted to hear. Leonard had informed me through his professional network that she'd moved to a different state, trying to start fresh somewhere people didn't know her story. Good luck with that in the age of social media. The fallout in our social circle had been dramatic. Most of our mutual friends had sided with me once they'd heard what happened. A few had tried to stay neutral, claiming they didn't want to take sides. I'd cut those people loose too. If you can't take a side when someone commits fraud and adultery against their spouse, you're not neutral. You're complicit. My friend Michael from work had been incredible throughout everything, letting me crash at his place when I couldn't stand to be in my house, listening to me process my anger and grief, never once suggesting I should forgive or move on before I was ready. Work had suffered initially. Thomas had noticed my distraction and declining performance. In December, he'd called me into his office and shut the door. I don't know what's going on, and you don't have to tell me, he'd said. But you've been one of my best engineers for 4 years, and the past 2 months you've been running at about 50%. I need to know if you're going to be able to pull out of this, or if we need to discuss other options. I'd told him everything, the whole sordid story. At the end, he'd sat back in his chair and whistled. Jesus. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Take 2 weeks off, paid. Not sick days, not vacation, just take 2 weeks to get your head straight. Then come back and we'll figure out a reduced workload until you're back to full capacity. That kind of human decency from a boss had almost broken me. I'd taken the 2 weeks. I'd spent them in therapy, individual therapy with a psychologist named Dr. Miranda Fletcher, who specialized in trauma and betrayal. What you experienced is a profound violation of trust on multiple levels, she'd said in our first session. Your wife, your brother, your family of origin, everyone who should have protected you instead exploited you. That's not something you just get over. Dr. Fletcher had helped me understand that being the peacekeeper wasn't actually about kindness. It was about control. I'd thought if I could just keep everyone happy, I could prevent conflict, prevent loss, prevent pain. But life doesn't work that way. Sometimes the only way forward is through the pain, not around it. You can't sacrifice yourself to keep the peace, she'd told me. That's not peace. That's just slow death. 6 months after finding that burner phone, I was sitting in my house, not our house, on a Saturday morning in late March, drinking coffee and watching the sun come up. The house was quieter now, emptier. But it was also mine in a way it had never been before. I'd changed the locks, replaced furniture that reminded me of Rebecca, repainted the bedroom. Small changes, but they mattered. I'd also started dating again, cautiously. Nothing serious, just coffee dates and dinners with women I met through apps. I wasn't ready for anything serious, and I was upfront about that. But it felt good to remember that I had value, that I was worth someone's time and attention. Dr. Fletcher said that was progress. My parents still didn't speak to me. They'd made it clear through intermediaries that they blamed me for tearing the family apart, for prosecuting David, for not being willing to forgive and move on. I'd made peace with that too. Some people would rather enable dysfunction than face truth. That was their choice. I couldn't control it. The money situation had stabilized. I'd paid off the debt, rebuilt my savings, and started contributing to my retirement account again. Alexandra had helped me understand the financial damage and create a recovery plan. "You'll be fine," she'd said at our last meeting. "Financially and emotionally, you're one of the resilient ones." I didn't always feel resilient. Some days I still felt angry. Some days I felt betrayed and stupid for not seeing it sooner. Some days I wondered what I could have done differently. But those days were becoming less frequent. Dr. Fletcher said that was healing. The moment that made me decide keeping the peace wasn't worth losing myself. It wasn't finding the phone, really. It was reading those emails and realizing I'd spent years making myself smaller to accommodate people who didn't value me. It was understanding that my need to avoid conflict had made me a target for exploitation. It was recognizing that being the nice guy had cost me my self-respect, my financial security, and years of my life. I'd rather be alone and authentic than surrounded by people who required me to be false. I'd rather face difficult truths than live comfortable lies. I'd rather burn bridges than let people use them to walk all over me. Some people will call what I did vindictive. They'll say I should have been the bigger person, that I should have forgiven David and Rebecca, that family is forever and marriage vows mean working through problems. To those people I say, you're welcome to your opinion, but you haven't lived in my skin. You didn't watch your brother and your wife conspire to drain your bank account while laughing about how clueless you were. You didn't spend months discovering that your entire marriage was a performance while your spouse was building a separate life behind your back. I don't regret anything I did after finding that phone. I documented. I consulted professionals. I used the legal system the way it's designed to be used. I exposed people who deserved to be exposed. I protected myself and my assets. I chose myself for once in my life. And if that makes me vindictive or cold or unforgiving, I can live with that. What I couldn't live with was continuing to be the person who prioritized everyone else's comfort over his own dignity. The truth is, keeping the peace with people who are actively betraying you isn't peace. It's just surrender. Real peace comes from standing up for yourself, from setting boundaries, from saying no more when people cross lines they shouldn't cross. Real peace means sometimes you have to fight. Sometimes you have to be the bad guy in someone else's story. Sometimes you have to burn it all down to see clearly. I burned it down. I stood in the ashes. And slowly, carefully, I'm building something new. Something that's actually mine. Something that doesn't require me to disappear to exist. That's not peace as I used to understand it. But it's honest. It's real. And it's mine. If you made it this far, thanks for listening to my story. I don't share it looking for sympathy or validation. I share it because maybe someone else is out there right now, being the peacekeeper, making themselves smaller, wondering why they feel so hollow. If that's you, I want you to know. You don't owe anyone peace at the cost of yourself. You don't have to keep pretending everything is fine when it's not. You don't have to be nice to people who are hurting you. You're allowed to choose yourself. You're allowed to fight back. You're allowed to demand better. And if people can't handle that, if they call you selfish or mean or vindictive, that says everything about them and nothing about you. The moment I stopped keeping the peace was the moment I started finding it. Real peace. The kind that comes from living in truth, even when truth is hard, especially when truth is hard. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.